that the most recent common ancestor of Lucy and the Shipley sisters must be further back than those many thousands of years. Mitochondrial DNA confirms the Hanks family account is true and the Vaughter account is false. But that is not the end of our study. Scripps said Lincoln told him some facts he didn't want made public.
The greatest president in American history didn't know where he came from. Abraham Lincoln held a fractured nation together, signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and delivered the immortal Gettysburg Address.
The morning that Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, there'd been a big New Year's reception at the White House.
Yet he could not say with certainty who his own maternal grandfather was. How does a man define a nation when he cannot fully define himself? When asked about his mother, Nancy Hanks, he offered poetry instead of proof. So behind that elegant deflection lies a mystery of uncertain parentage and modern DNA revelations that make Lincoln's origin story more unsettling and far more fascinating than the legend ever allowed. Lincoln's hidden bloodline. Let's start with what we know for certain, because in this story, certainties are rare. Nancy Hanks was born around 1784, most likely in Virginia. She married Thomas Lincoln in 1806. She gave birth to Abraham Lincoln on February 12, 1809.
Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809.
And in a one-room log cabin in Kentucky. And she died on October 5, 1818, from milk sickness.
Nancy Hanks Lincoln, who is Abraham Lincoln's mom, she died when she was 35 years old from milk sickness.
A brutal disease caused by drinking milk from cows that had grazed on white snake root. Abraham was 9 years old. That's the skeleton. Now here's where things get complicated. Even during Lincoln's political career, opponents whispered about his mother. The accusations were ugly and they were pointed. Nancy Hanks, they said, was illegitimate, born out of wedlock. In the early 19th century, and on the American frontier, that wasn't just gossip, it was a weapon. It implied loose morals, it implied bad blood. And in a culture obsessed with lineage and respectability, it could end a man's ambitions. Lincoln knew about these rumors. How could he not? But he never directly addressed them. Not publicly, not privately, at least not in any record that survived. What he did do was avoid the subject entirely. When Herndon, his closest professional confidant for years, tried to dig into the Hanks family tree, Lincoln gave him almost nothing. Vague answers, redirections. That famous quote about his angel mother, delivered with what Herndon described as visible emotion, and then silence. Why? Was he protecting her memory? Was he genuinely ignorant of the details? Or was there something in the story that Lincoln understood was too dangerous for a man in his position to acknowledge? We don't know, or Lincoln never told us. And that silence, that deliberate, painful silence, is where this mystery begins. And Lincoln's silence wasn't just personal, it was systematic. He wrote autobiographical sketches for campaign purposes. He gave interviews. He corresponded with hundreds of people. And in all of that material, the references to his mother are strikingly thin. A line here, a sentiment there, always warm, always vague. He talked more about his stepmother, Sarah Bush Johnston Lincoln, than he ever did about Nancy.
Lincoln's father married a widow, Sarah Johnson, the new mother of Abraham Lincoln.
Not because he didn't love Nancy, clearly he did, but because talking about Nancy meant talking about where she came from. And where she came from was a question without a safe answer. His political opponents certainly tried to provide answers. During his campaigns, newspapers hostile to Lincoln published claims about his family's low origins. Some went further, and hinting at racial ambiguity in his bloodline, a devastating accusation in an era when racial categories were policed with violence. Lincoln never dignified these attacks with a response. But the attacks themselves tell us something important. The question of Nancy Hanks' ancestry wasn't just a genealogical curiosity, it was a live wire in American politics. What we do know is that Nancy Hanks's mother was most likely a woman named Lucy Hanks.
Nancy was likely born on February 5th, 1784, and she entered the world as the illegitimate daughter of Lucy Hanks in what was then Virginia.
And Lucy Hanks is where the genealogical rabbit hole really opens up. Because depending on which historian you believe, which county records you trust, and which family Bible you accept as authentic, Lucy Hanks was either a respectable frontier woman from a well-documented Virginia family, or she was something more complicated, something that the rigid social structures of early America had no comfortable category for. To the 150-year genealogical battle. The fight over Nancy Hanks Lincoln's ancestry has been one of the longest-running disputes in American genealogy. And I mean a real fight, with rival camps, published accusations, destroyed reputations, and enough archival drama to fill a courtroom. Let me break it down. On one side, you have the traditional Hanks family narrative. This version says Lucy Hanks was the daughter of Joseph Hanks, a carpenter from Virginia, and his wife Anne Nanny Lee.
Her grandparents, Joseph and Nanny Hanks.
Now, Lucy was born around 1767, and she gave birth to Nancy, Abraham Lincoln's future mother, sometime in the early 1780s. The problem? No marriage certificate for Lucy has ever been found from that period. Nancy appears to have been born before Lucy was married, which, in the eyes of many researchers, means Nancy was likely illegitimate.
The first known mention of Nancy's illegitimacy came in early 1850s.
Now, illegitimacy alone doesn't seem like it should be a 150-year controversy. People had children out of wedlock on the frontier all the time. But the controversy isn't really about whether Nancy was legitimate. It's about who her father was, and, more provocatively, about who Lucy Hanks really was. This is where the second camp enters the picture. In the mid-20th century, some researchers began proposing an alternative lineage for Lucy Hanks. Instead of being a Hanks by birth, they argued, Lucy may have actually been a Shipley, connected to a family that had roots in a multiracial community in the Appalachian region. And this theory suggested that Lucy's ancestry might not have been entirely European, and that the Hanks family identity may have been adopted or assigned later. I want to be very careful here because this is exactly the kind of claim that can be distorted. Let me be clear about what the evidence actually shows and what it doesn't. The Shipley theory is not universally accepted. Many credentialed genealogists consider the traditional Hanks lineage far better documented. And the Shipley connection is based on circumstantial evidence, overlapping geography, naming patterns, and some suggestive but not conclusive records. It has not been proven, but it has also not been definitively disproven. And the reason this debate has persisted for so long is that frontier records from 18th century Virginia are, to put it mildly, a mess. Births weren't always recorded. Marriages weren't always documented. People moved frequently, changed names, and existed in communities where record-keeping was sporadic at best. And here's what made the debate so bitter. It wasn't just academic. For the descendants of the Hanks family, this was personal. Imagine being told that your family's connection to Abraham Lincoln, the connection that defined your family's story for generations, might be based on a misidentification. That the woman you thought was your ancestor might have been someone else entirely. Genealogy isn't just about names on a chart, it's about identity. And when you challenge someone's genealogy, you're challenging their sense of who they are. The academic battles were fierce. Books were published and refuted. Conference papers were delivered and challenged. Researchers accused each other of cherry-picking evidence, of misreading documents, of letting ideology drive their conclusions. Some of the most prominent Lincoln scholars of the 20th century weighed in, and they didn't agree. The controversy generated enough heat to melt the archival paper it was fought over. At the heart of it all was a simple problem. The documentary record from 18th century frontier Virginia is full of gaps. There are court records that mention a Lucy Hanks but don't specify which one. There are land deeds, tax records, and church ledgers that overlap in confusing ways. And there are multiple women named Lucy in the same region during the same period. Untangling which Lucy did what and who her parents were has proven to be one of the most stubborn puzzles in American genealogical research. So, for more than a century, the question of Nancy Hanks's ancestry remained stuck. Not enough evidence to settle it, not enough records to close the case. And then, as happens sometimes in historical research, a completely different kind of evidence entered the picture. The DNA breakthrough. Before we get to the findings, let me explain the tool because it matters. Mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA for short, is different from the DNA most people think of when they hear the word. Regular DNA, the kind that determines your eye color or your height, is a shuffled combination of both your parents. Every generation it recombines. But mitochondrial DNA doesn't do that. It passes directly from mother to child, virtually unchanged. Your mother gave it to you. Her mother gave it to her. And her mother gave it to her. It's a chain that stretches back through the maternal line for thousands of years with remarkably few mutations along the way. That's what makes it so powerful for genealogy. If you can find a living descendant in an unbroken maternal line, mother to daughter all the way down, then the mtDNA of that living person is essentially the same mtDNA carried by the ancestor you're trying to study. You don't need the ancestor's physical remains. You just need the chain to be unbroken. Now, here's a critical point I need to make because it comes up constantly and it's almost always misunderstood. We do not have Abraham Lincoln's DNA. Let me say that again. No verified DNA sample from Abraham Lincoln exists in any laboratory or research institution. There are artifacts, blood-stained fabrics, eye locks of hair, but none have been conclusively authenticated and tested in a way the scientific community has accepted. So when we talk about Lincoln's DNA, we're really talking about the DNA of his maternal line, traced through living relatives. In 2015, a significant mitochondrial DNA study was published that traced the maternal lineage of Nancy Hanks Lincoln through her documented female descendants.
Mitochondrial DNA and the maternal ancestry of Nancy Hanks Lincoln.
The researchers identified living individuals who could demonstrate an unbroken mother-to-daughter chain reaching back to Lucy Hanks, Nancy's mother. When they sequenced the mtDNA of these descendants, they found something that raised eyebrows across the genealogical world. The haplogroup was X1C.
These donors' mitochondrial DNA is in subclade X1C, shown below the kit number.
The announcement rippled through the genealogical community. Some researchers felt vindicated. Others were skeptical, as they should have been, because one study is never enough. Science isn't about dramatic reveals. It's about replication. It's about other researchers looking at the same evidence and reaching the same conclusion independently. And that's exactly what happened. In 2025, the findings were corroborated. Additional testing and analysis reinforced that the maternal line of Nancy Hanks Lincoln does indeed belong to haplogroup X1C. This wasn't a single test from a single lab making a dramatic claim. This was methodical, repeated, peer-reviewed work. The result has held up. So what is haplogroup X1C, and why did it cause such a stir? The mystery of haplogroup X1C. Let's talk about haplogroups. Think of them as deep ancestral branches on the human family tree. Every human alive today belongs to a haplogroup, a group defined by specific mutations in their mitochondrial DNA. These mutations accumulate very slowly over thousands of years, and they allow geneticists to trace broad patterns of human migration across continents and centuries. A haplogroup X is one of the less common major haplogroups. It's found in small frequencies across parts of Europe, Western Asia, North Africa, and, notably, among certain Native American populations. Now, within haplogroup X, there are sub-branches. Think of X as the trunk of a tree, and X1 and X2 as two major limbs. Most Native American X lineages fall under X2A. Most European X lineages fall under other branches. X1C is a sub-branch of X1, and here's what makes it interesting. It's rare. Very rare. It's not commonly found in large population databases. When researchers identified it in the Lincoln maternal line, it immediately prompted questions. Where did this lineage come from? How did it end up in a frontier family in 18th century Virginia? Let me tell you what we can say and what we can't. What we can say is that haplogroup X1C is a legitimate, documented genetic lineage. Its rarity makes it notable in population genetics. The fact that it appeared in the Lincoln maternal line is a verified finding. What we cannot say, and this is where I need you to stay with me, is that this haplogroup proves any specific ethnic or racial ancestry for Nancy Hanks or Abraham Lincoln. Haplogroups tell you about deep ancestral origins. We're talking thousands of years back. They don't tell you about the social or cultural identity of a person living 200 years ago. A person can carry a rare haplogroup and have no awareness of it. Their community, their culture, their lived identity might be completely unrelated to what their mitochondrial DNA indicates about a migration route that happened millennia before they were born. This distinction is crucial because the discovery of haplogroup X1C in the Lincoln line has been seized upon by various groups with various agendas. Some have used it to claim definitively that Lincoln had Native American ancestry. Others have connected it to claims about Melungeon heritage, a term I need to explain carefully. The Melungeons were a multiracial community historically found in the Appalachian region, particularly in parts of Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Their origins have been debated for centuries. Some researchers have described them as a mixture of European, African, and possibly Native American ancestry. Others have emphasized their connections to Mediterranean or Middle Eastern populations, and the term itself has been applied inconsistently, and for much of American history, it was used as a slur, a way to mark certain people as racially ambiguous and therefore socially suspect. Some researchers have proposed that the Hanks family, or specifically the Shipley family that some claim Lucy Hanks belonged to, had connections to Melungeon communities. This claim is part of a broader historical debate, and it is not settled. Let me be clear. The presence of haplogroup X1C does not, by itself, confirm or deny Melungeon ancestry. It does not confirm or deny any specific racial identity. What it does is add a piece of genetic data to a puzzle that is still very much incomplete. And yet, and this is what makes this story so fascinating, the rarity of X1C does suggest that Nancy Hanks's maternal lineage was unusual, not typical of the broad British Isles ancestry that most frontier Virginians claimed. Something in that line was different, where that difference originated, and what it meant for the people who carried it. Those are questions the DNA alone cannot answer. The DNA of a myth. Here's what I keep coming back to when I think about this story. We built a myth around Abraham Lincoln, the log cabin, the rail splitter, the self-made man who rose from nothing to lead a nation. And that myth is powerful. It's one of the most enduring stories in American culture. But like all myths, it required editing. It required choices about what to include and what to leave out. Nancy Hanks was left out. Not completely, of course. She appears in every Lincoln biography. She's the saintly mother who died young, the angel who gave Lincoln his moral compass, his hunger for learning, his compassion. But her story, her real, complicated, messy, uncertain story, has been flattened into a footnote. And when you start digging into why, you run into something uncomfortable. In Lincoln's America, illegitimacy mattered. Bloodlines mattered. Who your parents were, and more importantly, who people believed your parents were, could determine your place in society. The whispers about Nancy Hanks' illegitimacy weren't just gossip. They were political ammunition, and they hint at something deeper. a fear that Lincoln's background wasn't pure enough for the highest office in the land. Let's be honest about what was happening. In a nation that was literally fighting a war over the question of who counted as fully human, the ancestry of the president mattered in ways that went beyond simple curiosity. Lincoln's political enemies used every tool available to undermine him, and suggesting that his bloodline was tainted by illegitimacy, by poverty, by unknown origins, was one of those tools. The missing records around Lucy and Nancy Hanks aren't just accidental gaps in the historical record. And they reflect a world where certain people's lives simply weren't considered worth documenting. If you were poor, if you were a woman on the frontier, if your social position was ambiguous, you might pass through this world and leave almost no paper trail at all. That's not a failure of history. It's a feature of a society that decided some lives mattered more than others. And that's what makes the DNA findings so provocative. Not because they prove anything about race, but because they remind us that the neat categories we impose on the past were never as neat as we pretended. People moved, people mixed, people built families across whatever lines their society tried to draw. And then, when those families produced someone extraordinary, the mythmakers went to work, smoothing out the wrinkles, erasing the complications, building a story that fit the narrative the nation wanted to tell about itself. Lincoln himself seems to have understood this. His silence about his mother's background wasn't ignorance. It was strategy. Or maybe it was grief. Or maybe it was both. He knew that in the world he lived in, some truths were too expensive to speak aloud. And let's not pretend this is only a 19th century problem. We still do this. We still curate the stories of our heroes. We still decide which parts of their biography are flattering and which parts are inconvenient. We still flinch when the evidence doesn't match the narrative. Right? The argument over Nancy Hanks's ancestry isn't really about Nancy Hanks. It's about us, about what we need Lincoln to be, about what we need America to be, and about whether we're willing to let the truth be more complicated than the myth, because the truth almost always is. The frontier wasn't a simple place. It was a place where people from wildly different backgrounds lived side by side, intermarried, built families, and then, when the time came to write the official story, quietly erased the parts that didn't fit. The documentary record of early America is as much a record of what was hidden as what was preserved. And every blank space in those records, every missing page, every unrecorded birth. That's not an absence of history. That is history. The silence itself is a kind of testimony. But here's the thing about silence. It doesn't erase the truth. It just delays it. The records may be incomplete. And the paper trail may be broken. But the DNA, that quiet molecular record that passes from mother to child, generation after generation, the DNA remembers. And what it remembers, in this case, is a lineage that doesn't fit neatly into the categories we've built. A haplogroup that's rare. A maternal line that's unusual. A story that's more complicated and more human than the myth ever allowed. All that I am, or hope to be, I owe to my angel mother. Abraham Lincoln said it. Or at least, that's how William H. Herndon remembered it. A tribute to Nancy Hanks, a line carved into American memory. And yet, behind that poetry lies a silence that still echoes. We've traced the documents. We've followed the rumors. We've tested the DNA. Haplogroup X1C now sits on the record. Clinical, confirmed, undeniable. But the deeper story isn't just genetic. It's historical. It's cultural. It's about how a nation builds legends while entire lives slip quietly between the lines. A Nancy Hanks left almost nothing in ink. No speeches, no letters, no signed declarations. But her blood runs through one of the most consequential figures in American history. And that forces an uncomfortable realization. History isn't only shaped by the people we document, it's shaped by the people we overlook. Abraham Lincoln couldn't name his grandfather. The archives couldn't fill the gap. But his mitochondria carried the answer, generation after generation, long before anyone thought to ask. So here's the question that lingers in the dark. If even Lincoln's origin story isn't what we thought it was, how many other foundations of history are built on silence?